Welcome to the Plodcast, episode 87. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for doing whatever it is you do to get us into this conversation together. So, Plodcast, episode 87. Here we are. So, I want to talk about something in our Constitution, the United States Constitution, that has sort of gone by the way, and I don't think it ought to have gone by the way at all. And there are some severe problems that attend ignoring this part of the Constitution. According to our I'll back up. The last time the United States was in a declared war was in the Second World War. And what happened was, obviously, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and President Roosevelt then asked Congress for a declaration of war against Japan, and Congress responded by issuing that declaration of war. And then the president, as the executive, as the commander-in-chief, was then responsible to prosecute that war, having been declared by Congress. Now, this was this was just right according to Hoyle. This is right out of the Constitution. This is how it was supposed to function. In the United States Constitution, Congress declares war, and the president, as the executive and the commander-in-chief, pursues that war. He leads the country into war, but Congress is the one who declares it. Congress is the one who declares war. Now, the United States has been in numerous conflicts since the Second World War, some of them actual wars, and some of them in the gray area, and some of them not. So, for example, we were in the Korean War, which was not a declared war. That was a UN police action. We were in the Vietnam War, where 50,000 Americans were killed. There was the first Gulf War, and there was the second Gulf War. And we've had limited actions in other places. Now, let's say you've got a hostage situation where, 15 Americans are taken hostage by terrorists at a ritzy motel in some third world country. And the president determines to use military action to rescue them, and he sends in a SEAL team or, some sort of special forces team to rescue them, and shots are fired and people are killed. And it's a military action on foreign territory. Does that require Congress to declare war beforehand? No. The Constitution understands and made provision for those sorts of limited military exercises. And we did that in our war with the Barbary pirates under Thomas Jefferson. So the Constitution allows for what are called letters of marque, M-A-R-Q-U-E, letters of marque and reprisal. So you can conduct limited military limited military operations in a foreign country to achieve a very limited objective without a declaration of war. And that would be fully constitutional. But when you call up the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, and your objective is regime change, right? You're going after a country, and the whole point of the operation is to overthrow someone like Saddam Hussein and replace him with someone more to your liking. There is no other way to describe that than as an old-fashioned war, and of the kind that Congress must declare if it's to be constitutional. Now, what defenders of our current way of doing things want to say is, well, what's important is for Congress, for the representatives of the people, to have a say in it. They need to authorize military action. But that's not definite enough, because what happens is precisely what happened to George W. Bush is when he went to war with Iraq after 9/11, there was a vote in Congress that authorized military action, but it wasn't a declaration of war. And so consequently, you are volunteering you're setting yourself up to have 435 backseat drivers. When Congress declares war on Iraq, if Congress were to declare war on Iraq, everybody who votes for it is voting for Iraq to go down and for the leadership to be replaced. They're voting for a war. If they vote for military action, nobody is exactly sure what they're voting for. And so if things start to go badly, they can always claim that they didn't vote for that. Or I voted for military action, but not for that many bombers, not for that amount of shelling, or that I didn't vote for 3 regiments. I just voted for, so on. Everybody can second guess. And what this does is it lets Congress off the hook. And that's why Congress likes it. All right. What they want is the ability to authorize it and take credit for it if it goes well, and to have deniability if it goes poorly. And so what we need to do is I think conservative Christians who have a tendency to rally around behind the troops whenever the troops are in harm's way need to say, okay, you can pray for your cousin or your nephew or whoever who's in the middle of the action, and still believe that Congress is responsible to declare war. That's a duty that's assigned to them by the Constitution, and they shouldn't be permitted to shuffle out of it. So I'm currently reading a book by Victor David Hanson, and the book is called The Case for Trump. Now, Victor David Hanson is a scholar and an intellectual, a very fine writer, classicist, a historian, and I've appreciated stuff he's done in the past. And he's a standout individual in that he is one of the few intellectual leaders who has come out in favor of Donald Trump. And his argument for Trump is quite striking. Victor David Hanson does not this is not those books that come out during election seasons where some ghostwriter is hired to write a puff piece about the candidate for whatever, looking toward the future, or building our future together, or we have hope, or whatever. That kind of book that puffs up or touts a particular candidate is not what this book is like at all. This is a fairly sizable book, and Victor David Hanson is acutely aware of Donald Trump's tawdry business past, his somewhat licentious personal past, his tendency to vent his spleen at different people, his most recent renewed spat with John McCain, even though John McCain is now dead. All the things like that. Hanson knows all about it, and he acknowledges it, he sees it. But when I was reading Hanson's account of these things, he used a metaphor in passing that brought me up short, because it's a metaphor that I think describes the situation that we're in almost perfectly. And that is that Trump is chemotherapy. Now, how does chemotherapy work? And I'm not here opening up a debate on whether we ought to try chemotherapy or whether chemotherapy is a good thing. But this is just how chemotherapy works. And I want to argue, following Hanson, that Trump is, for the body politic, Trump is chemotherapy. Trump is functioning as chemo. So what does that mean? When you have chemotherapy, what you're doing is they discover you have cancer. You've got a tumor that they took out, and there's cancer in other parts of your body, and so they give you chemicals that are poisonous, that are toxic. And these toxic or poisonous chemicals are toxic to all of you. They kill cancer cells and they kill healthy cells. Chemotherapy is poison, deliberate poison. Now, chemotherapy is administered in the hope that you will destroy the cancer cells first and the healthy tissue second, or that you will have a lot of healthy tissue left when the chemo is ended. And so what this analogy requires is for you to understand or see or acknowledge that the body politic has cancer and that the deep state is that cancer. So you can acknowledge as Hanson does, that Trump's style is toxic and it's not, just imagine a happy, healthy country ruled by someone like Donald Trump for 50 years. That would be like treating your chemotherapy as though it were food. Well, no, it's not that kind of thing at all. You could acknowledge that, yeah, Trump's style, his abrasiveness, his problems, all of this is off-putting and toxic, and it's a problem. But his toxicity is not what's killing us right now. What's killing us right now is the deep state. What's killing us right now are the decisions by unelected leaders, what Philip Hamburger calls the administrative state. And the ability of the administrative state to undermine and fight back and to see to it that this Mueller investigation just recently concluded was carried on for 2 years with nothing really there, is a good example of what the administrative state is capable of pulling off. So Victor Davis Hanson argues that something can be a true problem and yet not be the problem. And so consequently, that means that for Christians coming up in the presidential election in 2020, what are we likely to face? It's likely that Trump will run again. He will want to he will want to be vindicated at the polls. It's likely that Trump will run again, and the current crop of Democratic candidates for the Democratic nomination indicate that whoever gets that nomination is going to be, as I call it, some commie. So we're going to be confronted with a choice between two situations. And one situation is going to be, shall we have 4 more years of chemo? And the other situation is, shall we knock off the chemo and watch the cancer come roaring back from its remission? So we're continuing with Plodcast episode 87, and we come now to our hamartiology section. Last time in episode 86, I gave you the Greek word anomos, and I'm going to do something similar to you again this time. The Greek word anomos means without law, and it needs to be distinguished from the other Greek word anomos that has an omicron at the end and not an omega. So there's very similar words with very similar meanings. So this anomos is used twice in Romans 2:12. For as many have sinned without law shall also perish without law. This is referred to the Gentiles who sinned even though they were not under Torah. Not being under Torah does not remove you from the authority of God's law, absolutely. This is in Romans 2. You remember in Romans 1, Paul argued that the Gentiles who have seen the majesty of God through what has been made are without excuse in their immorality. So this is a biblical reference to natural law or natural revelation. So being without law means, in this sense, they're without the Torah. They're without the books of Moses. They're without law in that sense. But not being under Torah does not remove you from the authority of God's law, absolutely. The only reason men perish at all is that they are lawbreakers. That's why we die. We die because we're lawbreakers. And that means that no one is apart from the law, period. No one is absolutely free of the law, because if they were absolutely free of the law, they would be immortal. They couldn't die. But the Gentiles were apart from the peculiar Mosaic applications of God's eternal law, and the word Anomos refers to that.
You've spent a pleasant half hour with Plodcast proprietor Douglas Wilson. This podcast is produced by Canon Press. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Plodcast on your favorite listening platform. To hear more from Doug, please visit canonpress.com.